My name is Aniruddha Shannal. I'm a documentary maker and a researcher on the works of Satyajit Ray. I've been an assiduous collector of documentaries, interviews, films, and writings by and about this great genius of our times. The filmmaker Satyajit Ray needs no introduction. This is an attempt to look into one of the aspects of this multifaceted genius, his evolution and creative output as a film composer. I thank the Rasa Festival for affording me their platform to make this video presentation that is close to my heart.
I'm composing a song for my next film, The Fantasy. It's going to be a sort of a musical. The two main characters, two youngsters from a Bengal village. One of them is a singer, the other is a drummer. They go out and have all sorts of adventures in various places all over India. And it's really a sort of a musical with dances and even battles, which will be shot to the rhythm of music that I'll compose for the film. Maharaja তোমারে সেলাম 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 মোরা বাংলাদেশের থেকে মোরা বাংলাদেশের থেকে
No other director in the history of the cinema who has had the same fluency in things as varied as script writing, directing, selecting his actors, composing his own music, doing his own cutting. He's a very gifted illustrator and designer. He's a writer of, I think, some distinction, and becoming more so, a lot of it for children in ways that very few people can do. He's a composer of nonsense verse, and sort of above all else, apart from his script writing and directing, he's a profoundly musical. I mean, amazing as a composer.
I never had a schooling in music, but it's just that, on my mother's side, everybody sings. It's a strange phenomenon. Da-da-da, da-da-dee, da-da-da.
Ray often used a tapestry of motion, natural sound, dramatic and elegant shots, along with bespoke music that he scored to create stirring and unforgettable sequences such as this one.
আপনারা কি ভেবেছেন কি ব্যাপার? আমরা কি জানলাম কি ব্যাপার? আপনাদের চাকর ব্যাপার? কি অধিকার আছে আমাদের ভাই কি করছে? I want an answer. বেরো বলছি। কি বেরিয়ে যা। কি নামো দাঁড়াও কে?
In the beginning, of course, I was not my own composer. I was using other composers like Ravi Shankar and Vilayat and Ali Akbar. I worked with them, but I always knew where the music would come, and this was I had to tell the composers beforehand that these are the points where I needed music, and so that was done, and this of course led to some difficulties because I was getting musical ideas of my own at that time, and it was difficult to dictate too much to professional. I mean, they were not professional film composers; they were virtuosos, really. But Ravi Shankar particularly was very gifted also in this direction because he had done ballet scores and all that. And that's how we worked. And later, of course, I took over composing myself because, for one thing, most of the time they were not available. And for another, I felt that since I couldn't think of another composer to use, I didn't think there were very many good professional film composers. I started doing it myself.
From adapting Baroque Western classical to South Indian music, to Hindustani classical, Rai was equally at ease at creating inspired compositions that have truly stood the test of time.
This is a piece of music from my film Charulata, which has a Scotch ballad as the basis of the tune. This song was used in a Bengali version by Tagore in the film. It was sung by the heroine, and this comes back several times in the film, and I use Western instruments mainly, such as violins, a vibraphone, a xylophone, cellos, in combination with Indian drums. And this is a common device which I often use in this film, since it had a very sophisticated westernized setting. It needed that.
As a self-avowed product of the East and the West that he wore like a badge of honor, Rai was committed to a fusion of the two in all aspects of his filmmaking, especially his music. He remained remarkably consistent in this matter. However, as gifted as he was musically, he was dispassionate enough to use as little of it as possible, the need of the film at hand being the ultimate arbiter for him.
I have never written any music which can be clearly identified as either folk or classical or Indian or Western, because the films have a look, generally, which are not wholly Indian, even if it's a modern story laid in Calcutta. There are all sorts of things which have very Western connotations. It's so Western that you have to devise a kind of a combination thing, you see. It can't be either wholly India or wholly Western. So it's music.
Mix European and Eastern and our Oriental music because our lifestyle is a mixture anyway. We live in houses which have a European look. We're full of English books. When we go out to work, we wear European dress, and it's no longer retains its Indian purity. It's thanks to the colonial rule or whatever. It's a mixture now. So if you use purely classical Indian music in films which are, for instance, contemporary in theme and look, urban, contemporary, it's wrong. It doesn't sound right. So I generally combine, I have almost always combined Western and Indian styles, except when I go back in time to earlier periods when their life was purer,
purely from the visual aspect, it is less influenced by the West, then or if it's a story about the village, rural India, which retains its age-old look, there you would use folk idioms, Indian instruments, Indian folk instruments, things like that. But the moment you come to a contemporary story or an urban story, city story, your music, if you use music, I find that with the city films, contemporary films, I use less and less and less music. I can do without music, I can use actual sounds creatively to serve the purpose of music. After all, ideally, one should be able to do without music completely. I think because one has an audience in mind, and one is always afraid that a certain change in mood will not be perceptible unless it's underlined by music, you use music. Ideally, a film ought to be able to do without music.
Satyajit Ray says music has always been his first love. As a child, he remembers vividly the first time he heard the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And even today, he firmly believes that the key to filmmaking lies in an understanding of Western classical music.
I think cinema is essentially a Western form. There is nothing comparable in Indian art at all to this concept of a fixed pattern existing in time, because Indian music is never the same. If you sing it once, if you sing it a second time, it's completely different. It changes.